Hello, sweet loves. Hi. I am really excited to be here with you now. I'm going to give just a few more minutes for people to join us. For those of you who are new to this channel, my name is Anya Light, and I'm a healer, starseed, and light worker, here to assist the planet in raising its vibration. And I'm so stoked to be here with you today for our soul satsang. Before we get started, I just want to share a funny story with you. So this topic, facing our fear of death, can be like a little heavy, So a little story to lighten the mood right off the bat. So the idea for this topic came about a few months ago. I was talking with one of my best friends, and she said, I've just been thinking about death lately all the time, having dreams about it, visions. It's kind of like really intense. And I said, oh my gosh, me too. That's so interesting. And we were just kind of like sharing different, things from our lives. And I said, oh, I would really like to do a soul satsang on this topic. And she said, yeah, that's great. That's such a good idea. I totally want to be there. And I have a question for you as well. So I'm going to get to her question later in the transmission today. And so we were like brainstorming and hatching our plans that day. And then literally right after that conversation, I walked out my front door and walked across the street to a park, beautiful park that's right across from my home. And as I was crossing the street, there was a hearse coming down the street. And I live in like a historic village. So the people that normally drive down the street there drive really slowly normally anyway. Everyone drives like 15, 20 miles an hour just because there's lots of people crossing the road and shops and stuff. And so it wasn't that abnormal to have a slow moving vehicle, but this was a hearse and it was probably going about 10 miles an hour, if that. And it was a refurbished hearse from like, I don't know, the 1950s or something. And it was looking pretty good. They had completely like made it look amazing, very shiny. And guess who was driving the hearse? Gomez from the Addams Family. And guess who was in the driver's seat? Morticia. So literally there were these people that dressed up like the Addams Family couple. Remember that TV show from back in the day? Decked out to the nines, my friends, like complete perfect makeup, outfit, hair, wig. So literally like this sight was going down the street. And I just was like, time stopped. And I just felt like, I looked up at this guy and I said, okay, universe, thanks for that confirmation. Now, was it an actual... I didn't touch it, so I don't know if it was simply a vision that I had, but it definitely looked real. Either way, it doesn't matter, but I thought that was quite hilarious. So let me know who's here. If you would like to say hello, I'd love to greet you and welcome you. So let me know if you're here and if you can hear me okay. Is the sound working properly? Let me know. All right, so to begin, we're going to get started with a deep breath. So taking a deep, slow breath in through the nose and a slow exhale through the mouth. Maybe this time closing the body eyes, inhaling through the nose. And an exhale through the mouth. This time, let the air travel all the way down to the feet and be released out of the bottoms of the feet. Another breath, my friends. So inhaling through the nose, slowly, gracefully. And as you exhale, just release through the bottoms of the feet down into the earth. Really feel on the exhale how your form is cleansed. Feeling more present, awake, and aware with us here today on this beautiful Saturday. Good. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see Jan here. Hello, my darling Jan, my dance sister, and Tanny Pat. Hey, Tanny Pat, super glad to see you again. She says that she's here and she's excited to be here. So I am very, very glad to have all of you here. Know that you're all welcome, every single one of you. And this is a place for you. So my intention before I began this transmission, I did a lot of chanting and a lot of energetic connection to all of you. So please know that whoever you are, I love you. And we are connected here through the magical means of technology. Time and space do not exist. So if you're tuning in later, you're also receiving the healing energies. And I'm so grateful to all of you. All right. So facing our fear of death, I think that the first time I started to get interested in this topic area was back about 10-ish years ago when I started getting interested in Ram Dass as a teacher. Let me know if you give me a thumbs up if you resonate with Ram Dass. A big part of Ram Dass's work on this plane was helping people to transition into the next life. He worked with a lot of different organizations that were focused on death and dying, hospice. He wrote a great book called Walking Each Other Home. Ram Dass, one of his most favorite quotes was, "We're all just walking each other home," meaning that we're all walking towards death every single day. And the best that we can do in this life is to recognize that and to be kind to each other, to give love and support to each other as we walk towards death. And I really love that quote so much because it kind of puts a lightness into it, and it kind of puts everything in a perspective. You know, we all have our different ideas we have our different opinions about the world and how we should live. But when we boil it down to it and we really cut to the chase of what matters most, it's really that. It's kindness for each other. It's being there for each other. So as I started to think more and more about death over the years, what I began to notice is that in our society, a lot of the structures that are created to keep us enslaved are only able to function because we are afraid of death. And I always think about the fact that if you think of anything that frightens you, anything at all, could be losing your job, it could be getting in a car accident, it could be fear of bees stinging you or spiders or snakes or whatever it is. If you think of any fear that could come up, when you break it down to the most core level, what it boils down to is ultimately a fear of death. That's what any phobia, any fear, any worry can be boiled down to. There's like middle layers of fears, but really the core, the deepest fear of all of them, every fear can be traced back to the fear of death. So in a way, it's awesome because that's what connects us as human beings. It gives us something that we all share. Now, whether or not, all of us understand that fact is another story. Many of us are not ready to go to that level of understanding, and that's perfectly fine. But it is something that we all share, that fear of death. I remember watching this documentary, and forgive me because I'm in a channeling state right now, so I don't plan a lot of these things. They just kind of come out. So, but I remember what's coming to me is this documentary I watched years ago about a Buddhist priest. And he'd been living a monastic life for a long time. And I believe he was a priest, so he was married, he had a wife. And in this documentary, he knew that he had cancer and he was going to die. And so this journalist was going to follow him around for the last few months of his life and document the whole thing. Because the Buddhist priest wanted to show the world that it was possible to have a good death, to have a respectful death, to have a brave, courageous death, to have a spiritual death. So he had this all planned out. Oh, and what happened was quite a thing. As the pain got worse for this priest, and he started to lose his marbles, basically, he lost the sense of who he was as a Buddhist. He lost his teachings. He began to get very mentally confused. And the physical pain was so intense that he just lost it. He lost it. And it was an agonizing documentary to watch because both him and his wife had these great plans and they were going to showcase this beautiful death. And then what happened was not beautiful. It was very hard to watch this documentary. His wife had, the plan that she was going to be the serene Buddhist wife. And then at the end, what ended up happening was they were showing her saying and doing some really incredibly fearful things. And without going too much more into it, it just brought home this idea that even if we have decades and decades of spiritual practice under our belts, even if we devote our lives to spiritual awakening and enlightenment, death can be like a kick in the butt. So let's all have compassion for ourselves wherever we're at in the journey. If you're here and you're just starting to think about facing your fear of death and dissolving your fear of death, cool. If you're longer into the path, awesome. We're all at different stages of it. There's no hierarchy or doing better than someone else. We're all facing our fear of death. And that's okay. And we're all in this together, to use that that quote that's quite overused. We all are in this together, friends. So I feel your hearts right now. It feels really good to be with you. So I wanted to share some practical strategies and steps that you can use to dissolve, to start to heal that core fear of death. And these are things that I've done in my journey that I've recommended to my students over the years. So I hope that they're helpful for you. And as I'm speaking here, if any questions or comments come up, please go ahead and put them in the live chat. You don't have to wait for the Q&A part. So go ahead if you'd like to put those in there. So the first thing is a very simple, well, maybe not simple to accomplish, but it's simple to understand concept of facing our fear of death. We can start, a good place to start is looking at our addictions. Addiction is interesting because it strikes at the core of us. What is an addiction? An addiction is when we use a substance, a person, a behavior to temporarily band-aid over a fear of death. So anytime that we reach for something that we know better, we know I'm doing this again. This isn't the most helpful thing. This actually has side effects, and this thing has like negative consequences. Why do I keep doing this thing? And then if we really look at it, the reason we're doing it, let's give an example. So I'll give a personal example. I have a very strong addiction towards nervous stimulants. So basically, anything that artificially pumps up my nervous system, so anything with caffeine, chocolate, and such. These things are also not good for my body, and I know that, and yet I often reach for them. Why? Often I reach for them out of a kind of boredom. So I love the feeling of being like 10 miles high. Like I love the feeling of being like just on top of the world. And that stuff does give me the temporary sensation of feeling that way. So, if I'm feeling neutral or relaxed or peaceful, I have this like voice in the back of my head that says, that's not good enough. You should be blissed out, right? So I reach for the chocolate because I want to get blissed out. Because in my mind, I feel like blissed out is better than bored. And why am I afraid of being bored? I'm afraid of nothingness. And nothingness is this void, this state of non-being. And in our minds as humans, we often feel like that's what death is. It's a state of non-being. We are afraid that when we die, we become nothing. So this fear of death is at the root of any addiction, and in particular, my addiction to chocolate and nervous stimulants. So in my work with my addiction, I always kind of remember that working through that addiction is also working on facing my fear of death. Because sometimes the pull to eat chocolate or have a cup of black tea is so strong that I feel emotionally that if I don't partake in that moment, it's almost like the sadness I'm feeling or the boredom I'm feeling or whatever negative feeling I'm feeling, it almost feels like that negative feeling will destroy me. And so I reach for that substance to cover it up. So a very practical way that we can face our fear of death is to face our addictions, to work with our addictions. And actually, our next Soul Satsang meeting is going to be on that topic, facing our addictions. So we're going to go more into that. But for now, it's important just to know that whenever you face and heal and work with an addiction, you are simultaneously working on healing your fear of death. Okay, so another thing is, and let me know if you guys are all with me here. Did that make sense to you? Would you like me to clarify anything on that? And another point, a practical way. So, okay, so what's a phobia? So most of us have phobias. It's a rare being that doesn't have a phobia. So some of us are scared of snakes and heights and flying on planes, right? Where does that come from? Where does a phobia derive from? Well, it didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's not random. The phobia can be traced back to a previous lifetime, a previous incarnation where you died in a pretty horrible way. So for me, I have a phobia of lightning and electricity. So I am quite certain that in previous incarnations, I was killed by lightning striking me and or like electrical sockets or just things with electricity. So I get really nervous when thunderstorms come and I'm like out in nature and I'm like unprotected, like I'm not inside. I start freaking out a little bit. It's much less, it used to be really bad, but it's still there. What are my other fears? That's really the big phobia for me, but we all have our phobias. And when we face our phobias, we begin to chip away at that giant block that is our fear of death. Because by facing the phobia, you literally face energetically that energetic structure that is holding you back in life. So for me, recently, this was really cool. So my fear of light, like electricity and lightning and stuff. I love to go kayaking. I love to go paddleboarding. And there is a part of the river where I live by, the Maumee River, where there is this power line, big one too. It's like probably 8 different strands of wire that go over the river, and they hang pretty low down. And there's even a part of it where you can hear the sound of the electricity. It's like zzz, and you can literally like hear it. So for a long time, I have always like avoided that. And I've never been able to kayak underneath that power line. I would like get up to it. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do it this time. Right. And I'd be like paddling, and then I'd get right up to the edge of it, and I'd literally stop, and I would just be frozen, and I would just stare up at the power lines and be like, and I'd be like, Anya, what the heck is your problem? Like, it's not a big deal. You're not going to die. Like, obviously people go through this all the time. It's not a big deal. I had to work and work and work. Finally, like about 2 weeks ago, I finally did it. And my own personal way that I got through it is I realized that if I started chanting the name of Rama, who's the spiritual being that I work with very closely, I started chanting Rama, Rama, Rama out loud. I was actually singing his name really loud to drown out the sound of the electricity and to bring courage and love into my heart. And I did it. And the rush that I got from that was so awesome. And I started to cry as soon as I got to the other side of the lines. I stopped rowing and I just sat there on the river, and all these tears just started flooding down because I realized that in that moment, I had made peace and I had healed all the different incarnations where I had died that way through electricity. And I just felt like all this old karma just falling off of me. And like my body felt lighter. And I've done this many times. I used to have a really intense fear of drowning. And there was a part of the river. Lots of things have to do with the river for me. There was this part of the river where the river goes from about 5 feet deep to like 20 or 30 feet deep in like one step. Like you're walking along the bottom and then it just drops because the 2 tectonic plates just kind of like went, and there's this split. And so I forced myself to swim across, and there was no one else around, and I just did it. And I know all of you watching here, you've had your experiences where you've forced yourself pretty much. I mean, it's not fun. You forced yourself in baby steps or big steps or medium steps to go into those phobias. Maybe you have a fear of heights and you went along with a friend on a mountain hiking expedition. Or maybe you were afraid of flying and you forced yourself to get on a plane and you just did it. So although we may not think of it that way, truly, when you face your phobias, you face your fear of death, because it's all the karmic imprints that are stuck inside of you that when you overcome that activity, you finally get on the plane, or you finally pet the dog, or whatever your fear is, that old karma is gone and released. So then you have a little bit more courage in your life, or maybe a lot more courage in your daily life, because you've let that fear of that trauma. It really is a trauma. A phobia is a lingering trauma from a past lifetime of a death that was unpleasant. Yeah, Jan was saying, I was talking with a friend yesterday about having a fear of things being boring. Yeah, I think we're like Jan. We both have that like fiery energy. If I can remember correctly, I think you're a Sagittarius, so you have that fire energy like I do. So it's like we like things to be interesting and exciting and mind-blowing and always an adventure. And like that is great because, the world needs that and leaders like us. But also at the same time, it can be really negative because, well, the shadow side of that is that, we get bored easily. So it's like tempering. How do we temper that? Yeah, and truly, like, I have such a fear of boredom. It's incredible. It's really incredible. So we work with it, we meditate, we do boring-ish things to work through that. Yeah. So, as we work through our fears of death, we realize that, we're like, as I said, we're all as human beings dealing with this fear, this core fear. And as more and more human beings wake up now in this great awakening that we're in, we'll start to see the dialogue in our societies start to shift. One of the roles of the shaman is to walk between the worlds of the living and the dead. Or you could also consider the medium someone who does this, the healer. There's a lot of different names for this, but someone who walks between worlds. And a lot of that waking up process that we're all engaged in is a lot about walking between worlds. I want to recommend a book to you guys. This is, okay, so it takes a lot for me to recommend a book. I've read thousands and thousands of books. I'm a reader. And, there's a lot of beautiful books out there. But this one, holy moly. Okay. It is called The Afterlife Revolution by Whitley Strieber. And it is truly, I'm reading it for the second time right now. Not only is it beautifully written, it's gorgeously written, but it is this account of a husband and a wife who are in a very beautiful relationship. And it is one of those, beautiful romances that they write poems about. They had this deep love, and they made a plan that when one of them was going to transition, that then the one who transitioned would stick around and send messages back to the one who was still alive in a body. And so this happened. So the wife passed away. She had a disease, so she died. And then she kept in contact with her husband, Whitley. And they continued being married, even though she was dead and he was alive. And I'm getting the chills. Like, this book, man, I'm getting all teary. This book is so beautiful. It literally, like, every page, I have to put it down to pause to cry because the love that they share. And it's called The Afterlife Revolution because they have this idea that humanity is split into two camps, two sides, the living and the dead. And they argue and they say that this division is so not necessary and actually is so harmful to us, to both sides, because the dead want to be in connection and communication with the living, and the living desperately want to be still connected and in communication with their dead. And so it kind of relates to this whole concept of ancestors, and this idea is the afterlife revolution is a new way of viewing life as something that is never ending. I think it is such a tragedy that so many people around the world right now truly believe that when they die, that's it. How sad is that? For me, I know 100% in my bones that I go on. And even then, I'm still afraid of death because for many reasons, I'm scared of the pain I'll feel, that I could feel when I transition. I'm scared of not knowing all of the details of how it's going to all happen. The mind likes to know, so then fear comes. But in terms of knowing, I am fully aware that I'm an eternal soul. But this is the journey that we're on, my friends. We awaken ourselves. We remember our past incarnations. As a side note, there's no such thing as time really so past. It's kind of not totally accurate to say it that way, but it's a way for us to think about it as a story. So we have these past incarnations, and anyway, off topic, but we get to know our other incarnations, and we make peace with and communicate with those loved ones on the other side. So, and we share that and we model that in the world. So this is part of our mission and our journey. And to go back to a couple more practical things. So how do we keep facing our fear of death? A good way is to just practice the art of letting go. I mean, I talk about this all the time in my Patreon community. You guys are probably totally sick of me talking about letting go, but it's like a major theme for this human journey. Letting go, letting go of a relationship that no longer fits, letting go of a job that no longer fits, letting go of a place that no longer resonates, letting go of things, of objects. How much can we let go of? Because when we think something is mine, we are trapped in ego. We're trapped in identity. But when we let go, then we are taking one step farther on that journey of facing our fear of death. Truly. A practical thing that you can do also is, so this is a wonderful practice that you can do every night. Before you go to bed, you can, so in the half hour, 20 minutes leading up to bedtime, you can just start reflecting on the fact that you're about to go to bed soon. And you can ask yourself, if I were to die in my sleep tonight, would I have done everything that I can do? Is there anything left undone, unsaid, unfelt? And then if something comes up, you can work with it. You can say a prayer to help you feel peace about that. You can do some energy work if you do energy work. You can apologize telepathically to someone that needs to be apologized to. You can set it all right for yourself emotionally before you go to bed. And just imagine that there is the potential that you could die in your sleep. By doing this, you're not only going to get deeper and better sleep, because part of the reason, and I've struggled with this, as someone who has healed herself from PTSD, but still has some bodily echoes of that. I've struggled to sleep deeply because my body keeps trying to wake me up because it's trying to stay vigilant of what's going on in the environment around me. But since I started practicing this sleep time kind of death meditation, I sleep better. It gives my body permission to fully just like go out, So put your life in order and mentally, emotionally, spiritually reflect on, yes, this could be my last day. And feel the feelings that come up for you, and do your best to make peace with that. There's something really magical about each day is kind of like a life in itself. Morning, dawn is a birth. It's a new beginning. Afternoon is like middle age, getting things done. And then nighttime is like old age, dying. and then everything starts again. Life is a cycle. On the seasons too. Autumn is a great time to meditate and reflect on death. No wonder Halloween is at this time. We think of skeletons and bones and graveyards. Autumn is a fantastic time for letting go into the nothingness, into the void of the winter. But as I said, death is not truly nothingness, and it is not a void. It is, you could say, a kind of nothingness in that the separate ego identity does die, but the soul continues. So here I'm going to transition into any questions that people may have. Please go ahead and let me know. And I'm going to grab a question that I got from one of our community members here. This would be a great moment. It will help me out. If you are resonating with what I'm sharing here, could you give me a thumbs up, a like? That would be great. Thank you. These things, it's just a part of YouTube. All right, so here's the question. Okay, so this question is from Helena. So Helena says, I keep dying in my dreams and traveling to this blank space. My soul just floats there, and I'm somewhat petrified. When I hear of someone dying, I feel like I go there. I feel like I've been seeing death everywhere. How would you suggest I work through this to heal the fear that I have of this nothingness? So I feel like I've already been kind of touching on this question. But to go a little bit deeper into it, that void place that we're all terrified of, that comes not from reality, but from cultural conditioning. So we live in a very confused, archaic society. And that society programs us from the moment of birth that it tells us that this life is the only life, that we are just a bag of bones, that everything is random. Ugh. It indoctrinates us into this totally depressing worldview, this idea that when the body dies, that's the end. And this is so primitive. This is so cut off from reality. This actually, I'm thinking of, for you guys who are watching, if you guys, let me write the name here in the chat. You guys have heard of Terrence Malick. He's a film director. Okay, I could probably talk about Terrence Malick for like a good 10 hours straight because I'm obsessed. But to narrow it down, Terrence Malick is this visionary film director. People love him or they hate him. I obsess over him. I think he is so brilliant. He makes these very deep spiritual movies about life and death and awakening, spirituality, these deep philosophical, metaphysical questions. And in all of his movies, even he's got these war movies and these romance movies. It's all different kinds of stories. But what runs through all of them is this wonderful reassurance that all of us wake up eventually. So we have these characters, for example, in his movie, The Knight of Cups, which I'm watching again right now. We have this like Hollywood film star who is completely lost. He's a lost soul. He just goes to these parties, these empty parties with like drugs and sex, and he's rich and famous and whatever. His soul is lost and his eyes are empty. Played by Christian Bale in this film. And yet, even though he's in this like milieu of like corruption and greed and like shallow shit, even then, he starts to have a spiritual awakening. And it's portrayed as if it couldn't be any other way. And that's what Malick does in all of his films. He shows these impossible situations, and he shows what the soul does. The soul constantly whispering into the ear, saying, "You're not alone. I'm here. You'll go on. Everyone you love goes on." So all of his movies do that. If you have to see one Terrence Malick movie, I would recommend his most recent one called A Hidden Life. And it is truly about the soul knowing that it is eternal, and how much courage that we can have when we know that. It's based on a story of Franz Jaeger, I forget his last name, Franz something, from World War II, who stood up and did not refuse to fight with the Nazis when he was living in Germany, and what he went through, because he knew that even if and when he was going to be killed by the Nazis, that he would continue to live. And it's such a beautiful story. I mean, in truth, all of our martyrs and spiritual figures that have faced death, Christ, for example, how else would he have been able to face that unless he knew 100% that the soul goes on? So really, to start wrapping up here today with all of you beautiful people, we only have a fear of death because there's parts of us that forgot that the soul is eternal. Our body that we live in, this vessel, it's composed of cells. And sometimes those cells just want survival, so it sends messages of fear. But in truth, when we are more and more in harmony with the natural world, with God, with the universe, those fear signals dissipate and lessen. So we walk on this path more and more, dissolving that fear of death, facing that fear of death. Sometimes in our life, it's more prominent. It's in our face. This whole pandemic that has been thrusted upon our society, it's been meant to capitalize on our fear of death. But so many of us have used this actually to purposely face our fear of death and to say, you know what? A virus that has like a survival rate of about 99%. It's not a big deal. And even if it had not as good of a survival rate, still there's no reason to be afraid, because in truth, we are immortal souls. And if we all imagine, my friends, I'll leave you with this thought. Imagine if we perceived death as an adventure. So kind of going back to what I was saying with Jan, Jan and I, we like to be adventurers, and we get excited about life. What if we were all excited about the adventure of death? What if we were like, oh my gosh, when I die, I get to then be born into a new body. Maybe I'll go somewhere other than Earth. Maybe I'll go to a different planet. Maybe I'll become a different being altogether. Maybe I'll just take a break and go back to source for a while. Maybe I'll do this. What if we contemplated this adventure and we got excited about it, even just a little bit? How would our lives change? How would our lives change if we shifted the fear into excitement? So I will leave you with that, my darlings. I would like to invite you, if you feel called to make a donation, the link is below. I run the Soul Satsangs on donations, so it's never an obligation. But if you feel like a calling to support my continued offerings in this way, then I most deeply appreciate it. And also an invitation to please join me. Our next Soul Satsang, so grab your calendar, is July 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. And again, on YouTube here. And yeah, we're not going to meet in June because I'm going to be traveling. So I'm going to be doing this big road trip out west, stopping in many different places across the United States, seeing the world through in my little car. I'm so excited. So, but I'm going to be mostly not available online for June. So please bear with me, and I'm looking forward to returning with many stories and to connect with you all again. So, all right, thank you for joining me today. Sending you so much love. Namaste.